All right, so I'm going to bring up Todd Lund. He is I think he's our youngest volunteer. And he's a very... And he's a very impressive young man to boot, so that's a double whammy for us. So take it away, Todd.
Thank you very much. So my name is Todd Lund Jr. I am the Student Affairs Coordinator for Convention of States, New Jersey. And I was in Massachusetts a couple weeks back, and I got to see our speaker, who's going to be coming up next for the first time in person. And he had an urgent message for them and an urgent message for us. In Massachusetts, he said, the Bay Staters, this is where the revolution started. You should know better. Well, we didn't have the shot that was heard around the world, but we were the crossroads of the American Revolution here in New Jersey. So, the next speaker, he is the president and co-founder of Convention of States, Mr. Mark Meckler. Please make your way up here.
Because I have a habit here in New Jersey, it seems, maybe we'll call it a tradition now, which is as soon as I'm speaking, I have to run out. It might even be in the middle of while I'm speaking at this point. I came to New Jersey importantly, and very importantly, this is Father's Day weekend, right? So I'll be honest with you, traveling on Father's Day weekend, not generally high in my car. But I got asked to do it, and I would actually normally say no. Mainly for my dad. My kids are grown. I don't need to be celebrated on Father's Day. My kids are super wonderful kids. I feel appreciated year-round. I have an 85-year-old dad. And if you've got family in that age range, my dad's getting up there in years and getting kind of frail. Every time I see him on the way, I think, maybe next year, maybe not. You never know. So my one condition was that I would come, and I flew out this morning, but I got to make sure I make my flight home so that I can be here tomorrow morning for my dad. When we do stuff like that, when we honor our parents, which we're told to in the Bible is to respect your parents, we're respecting tradition. And we're respecting what God expects of us. We are acting as conservatives. Conservatives conserve that which is great. It's not that we don't want to move forward. It's not that we don't want to progress. But we never want to do that by forgetting what came before. So you honor your parents. You honor your faith. Fundamentally, that's where it all comes from. We honor the father because that is the ultimate model for parenthood. There's an interesting thing biblically about the biblical law and the commandments and what we're supposed to do with our parents. You notice it says that we're supposed to love our neighbors, right? We're supposed to love God, to love our neighbors, and to love ourselves. It doesn't say that about our parents. I found that interesting. It says respect your parents, right? Respect your mother and father. And I think that's really fascinating because there is a distinction, and I think it's because God knows that sometimes those relationships are difficult. And sometimes some of us grew up in a family, maybe it's very dysfunctional, maybe it was even violent, maybe there was abuse. And so he understands, and we've got a lot of dysfunctional families in the Bible, right? And so he understands that it might be that way. And I think the difference between love and respect is really important. It comes into play in our system of governance as well, and how we feel about our country. Right? I have great respect for the institutions in the United States of America, deep respect for the foundations, the Declaration, the Constitution, the fundamental law of the United States of America. I gotta be honest with you, right now I love the country so much. Right? The respect never goes away, but the love is because I just don't like the way we're behaving right now. When you look at the nation, one of the things, I go to church every week, and I'm involved in prayer every single day, and I'm in Scripture every single day, and so I'm focused on Scripture and God first, and I'm reminded of our requirements that we're obedient to God first, right? So it's God first before country. Yeah. This is super important. Any argument that we're a Judeo-Christian nation? Are we a Judeo-Christian nation? Yeah. So this is our foundation. The pastor and I were talking out in the parking lot today about Article 5 generally, this idea that we, the people, can actually rally together and essentially overrule the government. Like, we can say the government's out of control and we have the right to control government. And that's a really interesting concept in human history. I'm not just talking in American history. If you look at all of human history and you look at the idea of self-governance, the idea that we elect our leaders, the idea that we're actually still in charge, as far as the government, we are sovereign. If you look at that idea and you want to find the historical train for that, you've got the United States of America is the modern example of self-governance, right? You know, our Constitution, entirely unique among constitutions in the world, this is the only document which is a founding document, a charter document, that is intended to be used as a weapon by the people against their government. Right? Our charter says that these are the things that we're going to allow the government to do. These are the rights that government is initiated to protect. And if they violate those rights, we have the right to use the Constitution against them. If you think about a lot of the cases at the Supreme Court, it's people going to the court saying, government overstepped. They're not allowed to do this. They're not allowed to do that. And we try to use that Constitution to keep government in a box. We are, at our core, a self-governing people. Where did that come from? How did we become a self-governing people? This is really interesting to me. You know, when I first realized that we're a self-governing nation and that's something unique, I wanted to know where that came from. There's a story from American history that I just love. You won't read it in any history books. You can look it up online. It's about Captain Levi Preston. He was a captain in the Continental Army. He fought at Lexington and conquered. And he was discovered many years later by a historian by the name of Mellon Chamberlain. In 1843, Chamberlain was traveling around the country, still a young country at that point, and he was trying to collect the stories of the last remaining Minutemen. At that point, the Minutemen were, if they lived, they were in their late 80s or early 90s. Now, for those of us who live in the modern era with modern medicine, we all know people that age, and we know some pretty sharp people that age. Back at the time in 1843, if you were 85, 90 years old, I mean, that's like Methuselah. Like everybody in your community knew, well, yeah, there's this guy who lives outside of town named Levi Preston, and he was a captain. So he was a captain in the Continental Army, and he made his way to North Carolina where he's retired, and he's approached by Mellon Chamberlain. Chamberlain asks him a series of questions. And he asked him about the causes of the American Revolution. He was trying to figure out, why did we fight? I mean, if you think about what we did as a nascent country, as these colonies who gathered together to fight the American Revolution, it was a pretty crazy thing to do. Right? They were fighting against the greatest empire ever assembled in human history. The greatest military, the greatest culture, the greatest science, the greatest everything, the greatest arts. This was the empire of all empires. And we decided as a nascent country right here in your state, back then a colony, that we were going to stand up against that and fight. And who wasn't doing that? Farmers, merchants. These were not trained military men, right? These are people, just regular folks with families at home, and they decided to fight. And Chamberlain found that fascinating and wanted to understand why. By 1843, we had a pretty good history of the American Revolution. So Chamberlain had a pretty good idea that he understood why we fought the American Revolution. So when he conducted these interviews, he would do it and he had a preset series of questions that he would ask. The story that I'm recounting for you, he actually told in the North Church, a famous church from the American Revolution. Every year, the Sons of the American Revolution meet at the North Church, and they do that on the day of the shot fired around the world. They do it to commemorate the revolution. And he was actually telling the story of meeting Levi Preston. He actually tells the story 50 years after he met Preston. So this is 1893 now by the time he's telling the story. One of my favorite parts of the story is he's setting up the story. I imagine him standing up on a stage like this, maybe at the pulpit, addressing the Sons of the American Revolution there in the North Church. And he starts by attacking the media. Awesome? And apparently, at the time, you think about what was the media at the time, it's the newspapers, right? And so apparently at the time, the newspapers were notorious for being behind the news cycle. Like everybody in town already knew what the news was before it was in the newspaper, because they were spreading the gossip on the streets and in the ale houses and in the coffee houses, so everybody already knew. So he gets up on stage and he says, I'm here to tell you a story that took place almost 50 years ago when I interviewed Captain Levi Preston. 50 years ago. I trust that's early enough for the evening news. So he tells the story of Levi Preston. He approaches Preston and he's interviewing him about the causes of the American Revolution. And he says, Captain Preston, when you went out to fight the Redcoats that day, why did you go? What drove you to the field of battle? Was it the Stamp Act? Were you frustrated by the idea that you had to buy these stamps as essentially a tax, put them on all the documents? Preston says, stamps? I never bought a stamp. Governor Bernard locked him in the armory. I don't think anybody bought any stamps. So that's weird to me, because that's a history I learned. People were offended by the Stamp Act, right? Now you gotta forgive me, I went to public school in Los Angeles, California, so I don't know a lot of history. He next asked him, he said, well, maybe it was the tax on tea. Maybe you were just frustrated that, you know, that's taxation without representation. The tea prices were so high. Preston says, son, we were farmers. We didn't drink no tea, we drank coffee. Boys dumped it in the harbor, and that was that. 2 strikes, right? Like, that's everything I learned in grammar school and all the way through high school. And he asks him, he tries to kind of go bigger, and he gets intellectual on him. He says, maybe you were reading the great revolutionary writers. Maybe you had read Burke, and maybe you had read Thomas Paine, Common Sense. And Preston says, I never heard of those guys. We read the Psalms, the Bible, Almanac, but those men you speak of, I know not of those names. So he's not reading the writers. He's not mad about the Stamp Act. He's not mad about the tea taxes. So I think Preston was probably frustrated at that point. He kind of just tries to go big. And he says, well, maybe it was British tyranny. Just sick and tired of the heavy hand of British tyranny. And he says, tyranny? Never felt any tyranny. Seems so weird. I mean, that's literally everything I learned about the causes of the American Revolution when I was in school. And I know it was Los Angeles, but I think that's what all y'all learned about the American Revolution. Like right here in the heart of the American Revolution, that's what they teach kids in school today. Well, maybe it's always teaching you to be woke, but in real schools even that's what they're teaching kids. So he asked them the question, well, if you didn't go out because of those things, what drove you to the field of battle that day? And Levi Preston says what I believe is the greatest summary of the American political philosophy of the time of the American Revolution and ever since, as far as I'm concerned. And he said this, when we went out to fight them redcoats, we meant only one thing. We had always governed ourselves, and we always intended. Them redcoats, they intended that we should. That's it. That's who we are as a people. We are a self-governing people. When I first heard that story, I was so fascinated by it, and I started thinking, well, where did he get that idea? Where did God, like just a regular guy, a farmer like Levi Preston, where did he have this philosophy? How did he get this incredible political philosophy that said that they had the right to govern themselves? Where did that come from? Did that come from England? Of course not. You know, in England, these people were serfs, and they were governed by a hierarchy that was a hereditary hierarchy, so it didn't come from there. So where did they get it from? And I started to study American history back from the American Revolution. And I started to think about it. I thought about, okay, what do I know before the Revolution? And if we think about what we learned in school before the American Revolution, we know about the Pilgrims, the Mayflower Compact, Jamestown, those are things that we know about, right? And I think, okay, so first, Pilgrims, Mayflower Compact, American Revolution. There's a time period in there, right? Between the Pilgrims, the Mayflower Compact, and the American Revolution. And I started to think, well, how long is that? Right? Anybody know how long that is? So I heard a couple of people who know this. I didn't know it. It's 158 years. This is an incredible amount of time. I'm going out and trying to research what happened in 150 years. Apparently, there aren't many books about this, right? We don't study it in school. Do you remember studying anything about that period? I studied nothing about that period in school. So I dig in, I'm trying to find books on it, I'm starting to read about it. I had the opportunity to go to Hillsdale College. My daughter's a Hillsdale grad, and I was there in her first year, and I had the chance because we donated to the school because I love that place so much, and I got a chance to sit for their homecoming game in the president's box in the stadium at Hillsdale College. Now, that sounds really impressive, by the way, the stadium at Hillsdale College, like your average high school. So sitting there in the president's box, and I had a chance to sit next to Larry Arnold, president of Hillsdale. Great man, brilliant historian. And so I this is my chance. I'm going to ask Larry about this period in American history. I'm sure he knows all about it. turned to Larry Arn, literally in the middle of the game, I'm sitting next to him, he's just completely focused on the game. And I turned to Larry and I said, hey Larry, I'm totally fascinated about this period in American history, from the American Revolution, all the way back to the Pilgrims period, and what happened in the middle of that time period. Are there any good books about it? And he looks at me and he goes, I'm trying to watch a football game. I completely shut down. That's a true story. He said, we're lucky at halftime, I'll tell you. So I talked to him at halftime, and he mentioned some books to me, authors that have become some of my favorite authors, historians. Bernard Bailyn writes about this period, B-A-I-L-Y-N, if you're interested. Pauline Maier, M-A-I-E-R, great historians who wrote about this time period. And what I realized when starting to read about this time period is, it is the most important time period in American history. Like, it's not the Revolution. It's not the Civil War. It's not World War II. It's this time period when Americans came to this continent. We came to this continent. We had the chance to do something unique in human history. We figured out how to govern ourselves. Totally extraordinary. There's no government when we come here. I mean, think about this. We come to a new continent, and the old rulers are way far away. They practice what they call benign neglect. There's not much they can do with colonies that are thousands of miles across an ocean. And so what do? We take the old institutions. We take the Bible. We take what we know has worked through history, because a lot of these folks knew their history, and they start to cobble together a system of governance by themselves, for themselves, not being told by anybody what they have to do. Self-governing. It's an incredible story. And so by the time you get to Levi Preston is 5 generations of self-governance. Then you try to tell Levi Preston, we're going to tell you what to do from England. He's like, yeah, my dad, you couldn't tell my dad what to do, or my granddad, or his granddad. You're not telling me what to do. I mean, it just made no sense to him. It was an unbelievable idea that somebody from a foreign land across an ocean was going to tell them what to do. They didn't even let their own governments tell them what to do. And so the idea that this could happen it was ingrained in him. It was in the DNA of this nascent nation. This is an incredible thing, this idea of self-governance, but you can go even further back, because I wanted to know, okay, if these guys developed this, where else has this happened in human history? Like, what can we study that was prior to the American Revolution, prior to the Pilgrims, prior to this period of self-governance, where we find self-governance? And the answer is way back, way back. You've got to go all the way back to the Hebrew Bible if you want to find a period of self-governance. True self-governance. Self-governance comes directly from God. Directly from God. It's in the Hebrew Bible. Go back to the Judges period in the Hebrew Bible. This is extraordinary to me. If you think of everything as kings and kingdoms, right? Everything is hereditary monarchies, or tyrants who rule by force, who got their power by force, who took other lands. That's how you get governing systems. Little fiefdoms, towns, city-states, countries, however they build it, it's all either by force or hereditary, kept by force. And when the Israelites are told by God how to govern, God says, choose the judges from among yourselves. That's weird to me. It's such a weird thing. God is watching over the Israelites. He's telling them what to do. He's guiding them with his own hand. The hand of God is over them. The best people to rule over them, the best people to be judges, are best chosen by God, not by men. Like, we're sinners, we're fallible, we always have been. Look at all the figures in the Old Testament and how terrible they were. The greatest heroes were terrible people also. Right? And so this is incredible that God says, no, I'm not going to choose for you. I gave you free will. It's a gift from God that he gave us free will. And he said, I'm going to have you exercise your free will. We're going to create a legitimate system of governance by allowing you to choose from among yourselves. And they do so. And by the way, as long as they do that, it works pretty well, doesn't it? I mean, history tells us, the Bible tells us, as long as they did that, as long as they chose righteous men from among themselves, and the system worked pretty well. It breaks down eventually. Eventually they want a king. Man, this is kind of a famous story. Give us a king, right? Yeah. What did God say when they said give him a king? No, God said, yeah, sure, go. Sure. It's not going to go really well. In full disclosure, God's like, you should read the fine print. It's really bad. My experience in my life with God is, It's when he lets me do exactly what I want to do on my own. That's when it goes really bad. So that's what he says to them, like, go ahead, do whatever you want to do. So they give up self-governance, they have a king, it doesn't go well, blah, blah, blah. You know the story. My point in tying this whole historical chain together for you is if you want to govern yourself, if we want to govern ourselves as a people according to the way that God chose to tell the Israelites to govern themselves, which is how the Pilgrims patterned how to govern themselves, which is how the American experiment was founded on the Pilgrim experiment, going all the way back to Judges, then we got to go all the way back to the Old Testament. And we got to be a self-governing society. And a self-governing society means we don't have a king. And a self-governing society means we don't have kings. And a self-governing society means we choose rulers from among ourselves. And a self-governing society means those rulers listen to us. Right? And this is critical. They're not listening to us in Washington, D.C., are they? Does it frustrate any of you? It frustrates me. It pisses me off. Sorry. I'm in a church. Sorry about that, Pastor. So, look, we're all really frustrated by that. So the question is, then what do we do about that? So, you know, when I look at how I view politics and how I view faith, I have what I call political theology. I know we're not supposed to do that. I've done the ultimate sin in the secular world. Politics and religion, if you're watching, I'm so sorry. I committed the ultimate secular sin. But I don't think you can do politics without religion. Right. I don't understand how people say you can do politics with religion. Now, I got full disclosure here. I'm a very baby Christian. Right? I'm 61 years old. I accepted Jesus Christ as my Savior when I was 51 years old. So I'm 10 years a baby Christian. I got a pastor back there to correct all my theology. And now I have an excuse. Right? To just give you a brief side background, I was raised a secular Jew in Los Angeles, California. I went to college at San Diego State. I chose that university as a very intellectual young man because it was the #1 party school in America. That's what I majored in. I didn't learn a lot, but I took a lot of classes in religion. I always found religion fascinating, and I did learn at San Diego State definitively, unequivocally, that the greatest force of evil ever on the face of the earth was Christianity. That's what I was taught by religion professors. So it's unbelievable. Marxist, anti-Christian, human secularists. Terrible people who taught me that. And I came out of college believing that. And I was an atheist for a long time. Ultimately, as I grew up, I just got wise and realized, well, Earth didn't seem to rotate around me, contrary to what I had been told. And maybe there was something more. I spent most of my lifetime as what I would call a seeker. Literally studied deeply Buddhism, Hinduism, yogic practice, Jainism, which is an ancient precursor of Hinduism. Like, I looked at everything. Except Christianity, of course, because that was easy. You can't look at that one, right? And except my own heritage, which is both sides of my family are Jewish. From Ukraine, strange enough, from what's going on in the world right now. And when I got into politics, I started to get introduced to Christians all over the United States of America. I was one of the founders of the Tea Party movement. I traveled all across the country. And almost everywhere I went, I always loved people. I loved building relationships. Almost everywhere I went, I was sitting around a table with people or hanging out in a room like this. And I think, man, I love that guy. He's just awesome. I love that one. She's amazing. And I'm pretty bold, and I would be like, so, Dominic, you know, you're in politics, pretty ugly. People attack you. Now, he's been pretty light-hearted. Like, it doesn't seem to have, like, this negative effect on you. Why? Guys like Dominic would say, oh, well, because I'm saved. And I'd be like, I don't even know what that means. Well, I was born again. That's weird, okay. How's that work? You know, or just they would say, like, you didn't know me before I walked with Jesus, or, you know, all the things that we hear as people of faith. And over time, it just started to dawn on me, like, something is going on in my life because I'm surrounded by these people, and everywhere I go, I'm falling in love with people of faith, and primarily they're Christians. And so I started to inquire about that, of people around me. I had some really pivotal events in my life. Some of you might know Dr. James Dobson, know that name, an incredible faith leader. I had a chance to sit at dinner one night with Dr. Dobson and his wife Betty, sitting around a big fancy table at a big fancy event, and there's a bunch of fancy people at the table except for me. And I remember feeling really out of place at the table. There were literally like ambassadors and senators and stuff. And I'm not kidding. I don't remember who else was at the table except for Dr. Dobson and his wife Betty. And I remember sitting there watching how he dealt with that table. I knew exactly who he was. I knew he was internationally famous. I knew he had ministered to presidents, prime ministers. Like, he built this incredible nationwide and worldwide network. And I was just thinking, man, I've never been at the table. That's probably the most important guy as far as matter of influence in the world. And he never acted like it. Like that for 1 minute. The whole night I sat at that table, the entire night, I remember just watching him and watching him redirect the conversation around. Anybody would ask him a question, within seconds he would point it at somebody else. Or he would flip it right back at the person. And it was genuine. He was genuinely interested in them. He genuinely cared about them. He genuinely wanted to know their stories. And I was so blown away by the level of humility. That's my favorite trait in human beings. When I meet people who are truly humble, I just immediately am attracted to that. And I remember looking across that table and thinking, I have no idea what it is that that guy has, or whatever that is. I want that guy. Whatever that thing is. And I started to seek it, and over my lifetime, I was blessed to be introduced to great mentors, Christian men and women who really helped me along the path. I did a lot of study. I did all the stuff that, that a guy who's over-intellectualizing stuff. I'm a lawyer by training, forgive me. But I like to read, I want to know. I read all the apologetics from Chesterton to C.S. Lewis and you name it, Peace for Christ and Strobel, all of these things. And then I had the most wild epiphany like you could possibly imagine. I just don't remember when it happened. Literally, one day I just thought, well, it doesn't make any sense not to believe it. I just became a believer. And I became a passionate, wildly in love with Jesus believer. Like crazy, like I'm just difficult. Because I'll get on stage at a political event and I'll talk about Jesus Christ. I'll talk about my faith, and I'll talk about how it relates to the country, and I'll talk about how it creates political theology. So I'm doing politics. And now all of a sudden I'm in love with the Lord, and so how do those two things go together? And so I start, because I'm a researcher, dig in, figure out what does that mean to me, how does that work, how can I reconcile being a follower of Christ, being a biblical believer, being somebody who studies Torah deeply, how do I reconcile that with my interest in government and politics? And here's what I came down to ultimately. I think that right now we live in a Romans 13 kind of time, right? And because we've got a government that seems to be telling us what to do, and a lot of people, I'd say most people, all the maskey people, right? They're doing exactly what the government tells them to do all the time. And it says right there in the Bible, I read scripture, I'm reading Romans 13, it says we're to obey the ruling authorities, right? There's a lot of obeying going on right now, and I remember the first time I read that, I thought, I hate that. I'm not doing that. I'm a rebellious guy. I'm not going to obey the ruling authorities. And I remember talking to my friend Tim, who's been a great Christian mentor for me. He said, man, you're not getting it. You're misunderstanding what Romans 13 is saying. And he's, one of the things he explained to me is like, yes, obey the ruling authorities because God put them in the place of but God's law is always above their law. God is always above men. And so obey the ruling authorities doesn't mean that you ignore God and you do wrong because men tell you you're wrong, right? So there is always a law above that. So obey the governing authorities. And then I looked at obey the governing authorities and I thought, I got it. They're not obeying us, are they? Those guys in D.C., right? They're not. We're the people who are in charge. Who's in charge in the U.S.? Them or us? We're in charge. Self-governing nation, right? We're in charge. And I thought, so we're the governing authority. Really? In the United States. So if we're the governing authority and they're not obeying us in Washington, D.C., then in God's eyes, they're in big trouble. Because I'm smart. And I went back to Tim and said, okay, I got it all figured out. Romans 13, obey the governing authorities. We're the governing authorities. They're not obeying us. They're in big trouble. And he said, completely wrong. How's that wrong? I worked it all out. I went to school in LA. And he said, no, if you're in charge, if we really are the governing authority, and they really aren't doing what we say, and we don't make them do what we say, then where's the judgment going? And I had a very deep pit in myself. Seriously. Because I thought, okay, well then that means it's my fault. That means it's actually on me. That means when we as a nation murder 63 million babies, I can't just point at them and go, well, it's them. It's those people in D.C. It's the Supreme Court, whoever made that happen, right? When they're stealing from us and our children and our children's children, and it's so immoral and egregious, and they keep doing it, and I just go, well, it's them. And my friend Tim taught me, no, like go like that. You know, because we, the people who are the sovereign authority of the United States of America and our system of governance, are not stopping that. And so then I try to think, well, can we? Do we actually have the power to stop that? And the answer is, yeah, we do. We actually have the power to stop that. We can stop all of this. The only question is, will we? Will we stop it? Will we have the fortitude? Will we have the spine? And some of the other bodily parts required to stop this stuff. And we got to ask ourselves that question. And for me, the answer is, I'm going to fight. And I'm going to fight no matter what. You know, we come from fighting stock in this country. You look at the history of the Revolution. I married a good Irish girl, Patricia Ann McGillan. If it were not for the Scotch-Irish, there is no American Revolution. Right? Literally, I mean, we are just warriors by nature. Just like Levi Preston, you're not going to tell us what to do, but the question is, do we still have that in us? Do we still have that fight as a nation in us? I do believe we do, but I believe for a lot of people it's gone to sleep.
Yeah.
It's been pushed down deep inside of them. We got comfortable. We didn't fight because we didn't have to fight. Look, I'm 61 years old, and most of my life has just been cushy, to be honest with you. And I mean that on a personal basis and on a national basis. Personal basis, I'm super blessed. I grew up in like a Leave It to Beaver house in the suburbs in California. My life, I had a pretty rough childhood because sometimes my parents said no. Like, that's my life, really. I've had very little tragedy in my life. Nobody close to me has passed away. I mean, so it's really an extraordinarily, overly blessed life that I don't deserve. But that's my life. But if you look at us as a nation, that's kind of our life as a nation for a long period of time. This nation's never been invaded. Right? We've fought wars, we've had existential threats, but when was the last time that we as a nation faced an actual physical existential threat? It's been a long time. You know, we have wars, we fought wars. I don't want to forget the men and women that have gone off to fight wars, but not like World War II. So it's been since at least World War II when we entirely sacrificed as a nation, when we really suffered as a nation. There have been incidents. I don't want to minimize 9/11. Right? It was a critical moment in our nation's history. But take 9/11 and compare that to World War II and what the nation suffered as a whole together, collectively. We haven't done that. We've grown soft. And so because we've grown soft as a nation, because we haven't suffered as a nation, we haven't gone through a depression. Our parents and grandparents suffered through a real depression where people were actually starving. We haven't done that as a nation. We've grown soft as a nation. This is normal, right? You know, you go through that cycle. Good times make soft men make bad times make hard men make good times. Right? That's a cycle. And so we're in the midst of that cycle. That's just the way things go. And so now the question that you and I have to ask ourselves is, will we stand up to the task at hand? Right now, I would argue we've lost Washington, D.C. Anybody disagree with that? No. We've lost that city. I've been going to that city 14 years now. I go a lot less than I used to. And one of the reasons I don't like going there, aside from it's a swamp and now it's dirty and dangerous and all that stuff, is when I walk around in that city, I don't feel like it belongs to me. I feel like I should feel like it belongs to me. I look at the monuments, go to the Lincoln or the Jefferson, and I look at those things and I admire the monument, but I just think it doesn't belong to me. Like, this is in the hands of, dare I say it, I will be right, the communists, the Marxists run Washington, D.C. And when I say that, I'm not just referring to the president or his administration or any particular politician. I'm talking about the deep state. I'm talking about the bureaucracy. That's who owns Washington, D.C. It's not for you anymore. They own that city. And they don't actually want you there. They don't actually like you there, and you're the hoi-polloi, you're the ragged public out there, the dirty public. They don't want you there. And I think we have to take that city back for our own. That is our city, is it not? Yes. It belongs to us. That's our heritage. It doesn't belong to them. It belongs to we, the people.
Right.
So the question we have to ask ourselves is, who are we? Will we stand in Levi Preston's shoes? Are we willing to face the redcoats, metaphorically speaking, and say, no, you've gone that far, you're not going any further. In fact, we're going to push you out of our possessions, out of our homes, out of our lands, out of our families, away from our children, out of our schools, out of our local governments, out of our taxes, out of our environment. Are we willing to stand and do that? That's the question that each one of us has to ask ourselves. I can promise you there's one thing that I know for sure about how this story ends. I know how this story ends because I know our Lord and Savior. So I know that end of the story. So I never despair. No matter how dark it is in D.C., no matter how dark it is in New Jersey at the Capitol, I never despair because I have hope in our Lord and Savior.
Amen.
I don't despair also because I have hope in you, in the American people. See, I have this unique ability because I get to travel all over the country. And what an incredible blessing to travel our country and to meet people like you everywhere I go. I was sitting here, I was watching you sing the national anthem. It brought tears to my eyes. And I posted that to our internal Slack channels at Convention of States. And what a privilege to live in a country where somebody can get up and sing that beautiful anthem for us. And more importantly, we all sing along. And we're still free to do it. Amen. So I know how that story comes out. Don't know what happens to the United States of America. The end of that story is not written yet. Could be really bad. We could cheat history and continue to be the longest living republic in the history of the world. We don't know how that comes out. John Quincy Adams was the 4th president of the United States of America. Most people know his name. And very good president, great guy, serious Puritan. Most people don't realize that after he was president, he ran for Congress. You guys know that? Like, some people know that, most people don't. I didn't know this story until fairly recently. I can't even imagine that. I mean, you're thinking, man, you are the chief executive officer of the United States of America, commander-in-chief, and then you're going to go run for Congress and be a backbencher? What would motivate somebody to do that? Does he love politics? No. He did it because he was a hardcore abolitionist. And he felt that slavery was a stain on the heart and soul of the United States of America, and he had not been able to end slavery as president, and he intended to end slavery during his lifetime. So he goes to Congress. And in Congress, he's a warrior for abolition. In fact, they end up nicknaming him the Hellhound of Abolition. And they call him that because he won't talk about anything else. Every time he gets on the floor, it's abolition this, abolition that. We got an abolition bill. We got to get rid of slavery. We got it. And whenever he meets anybody in the hallway, has meetings with anyone, will he support my abolition bill? You know, and he does this literally for 17 years. It's hard to imagine. Towards the end of his life, he actually dies on the floor of Congress, floor of the House of Representatives, has a stroke. There's a plaque in Statuary Hall if you ever go there, because that used to be part of the House. It was just a small plaque that says this is where he fell. He actually died and must have a women's cloakroom. They kind of drag him off the floor. So there's a certain ignominy in that, isn't it? It's not as scandalous as it sounds. Before he died, there was a reporter that went out and spoke to him about his time in Congress. And the reporter said to him, Mr. Adams, what's your problem, dude? It's all you ever talk about is abolition. They don't like you in Congress because that's all you ever talk about. You know, in fact, at one point, he talked about it so much they passed the John Quincy Adams Censure Act, which said that they would hold a 5-day censure trial if he talked about abolition on the floor of the House again. So he talked about abolition again. Then I get 5 days to talk about abolition. The reporter says, I don't understand why you keep doing this. You're not going to get abolition. It's just not going to happen. Nobody's interested in it. You know, even we in the media don't like you because you never say anything new or interesting. It's abolition, abolition, abolition. And Adams says, duty is ours. Results belong to God. and turns and walks away. I don't know what happens with our great country. I have no idea, because God knows. None of us know. I can't predict tomorrow, let alone what happens to the United States of America. What I can do, what each one of you can do, is to do your duty. Duty is kind of a lost concept in the United States of America right now. Duty means that's that thing you do when nobody's looking, because it's the right thing, because you know God's still watching. Duty is what you do when you don't want to do it, like you don't feel like doing it, you're too tired to do it, you're too irritable to do it, you've got too much to do, but you do it anyway because you don't have an obligation, a duty to do. That's the honorable thing to do. Duty is that thing that you do for somebody else's children. Maybe you don't have children, but you're doing it for the next generation anyway, and the generation after that, and maybe for all of posterity. Duty is the thing that you do when you know that you will pay a price for it, and that there's nothing personal to gain. It's a lost art in the United States of America. The greatest honor for me is to come into a room like this, because I know you're people who understand duty. And what our obligation is to do our duty. My obligation in doing my duty is to fight to call the Convention of States in the United States of America before it's too late. Because as the pastor said, I believe this is the one thing big enough to fix the things that ail this country. I got one more thing to close. It's not big enough without God. And if we don't turn to God, if we don't humble ourselves before God, if we don't understand that everything comes from God, that He is Alpha and Omega and everything in between, we do not surrender, humble, abide in Him, wait for Him, listen to Him, put that first, and there is no saving America, no matter what.